BDD will just pick up the features from this features directory. And so when you say BDD test, it'll scan everything in this directory, which means that if a bar clamp drops its feature files in this features directory, then it will automatically pick up whatever additional features you add. Okay. Like Rails, what this system does is it does some things by naming convention. Some of the things are explicit and some of the things are by naming convention. So let's look at nodes in here. If I look at the nodes feature, these are the things I'm testing in the nodes feature. And then, all right, so let me explain what happens when you actually test this feature. Every one of these things in BDD and also in Cucumber are called, and I've borrowed heavily from Cucumber naming. So if you look at Cucumber, you'll find this very similar. The way this works is the BDD system breaks every line down into a step. So these lines here are called steps. The and creates an implied then. So this is just to make the English a little bit happier. So if you have a when then and an and after it, then it's going to keep using whatever condition was ahead of it. These individual steps break down in code into specific steps. And I'm going to start in the most commonly used step file, which is called WebRat. WebRat is a Cucumber term. It has some basis in the concept that they were using capybara, which is a giant rat, for the web server. And consequently, it has trickled down into the BDD. So WebRat is the place where most every step file that interacts with a web page is going to be maintained. So the way this works is pretty straightforward. There is a routine called step. Once again, I'm down in Erlang, but this is really easy because you're mostly cutting and pasting, and I'll show you some interesting aspects to this. So you'll notice that the thing about Erlang is that it is really good at having the same method over and over and over again with slightly different parameters. That is pattern matching. So the step file takes in the configuration file, takes in a set of global values, and then it brings in what is called in Erlang a tuple. So a curly bracket, and it's effectively a list. Step given, this is the number of the step, and then this is the string that I'm breaking down. So on these features, when I am on the home page, let me find the when I'm on the home page. When I go to the home page, maps to, sorry, the givens are a little bit different. Given I go to the home page right here. So this step, when I go to the home page, will perform this action. It'll do a EURL get, and it'll just retrieve the results from the config file based on no URL. If I pick a page, it's going to pass the page. It's going to do the same thing, but pass in page. EURL is the library that contains all of the web requests. So in here, you're going to find things like get, post, delete, finding blocks, finding links, finding buttons. So EURL decomposes HTML. I don't change this code very often. Unless I actually need it to do a different thing. So like this, so I can always reuse the code to find links and things like that. One of the things that this code does that's really handy is it does digest auth. So the EURL code calls the digesting, and so since our website is secure, it is important that you're able to authenticate, and this code actually handles the digest auth for that code. It's one of the advantages to being able to have the system integrated the way it's integrated, is it works and validates security as it goes. So every one of these lines is going to decompose into a step. Most of these are going to fall to the WebRat steps when I click on a link. So you can see there's a whole library. So these are whens, and then there's thens. Then I should not see this text, or then I should see this text in this section of the page. And these things evolve over time, and some of them can become pretty sophisticated, right? I should see a button with this text on it. I should see downloaded text. There's all sorts of things. This file grows over time. However, it's intended to be a general purpose library. And so it's very easy to imagine a case where you do something specific to a node that is not something that you want to be common. And so for those, you would put them as steps in the node's Erlang file. So you'll notice here there's also step files. And this is something very similar to what Cucumber does. It's the exact same pattern. The idea here is that when the system evaluates a step, it has a search order. So the first place it's going to go looking to see if it can find the step is in the file with its own name, right? And then it's going to start going down this list. So what happens is, if you in the nodes feature ask for a step that doesn't exist, and I'm about to do this to show you what that looks like, it will then search in the crowbar file looking for that step. It will then search in the WebRat file looking for that, and then it'll fall back to the catch-all file where the last resort steps are kept. Yes? Yes. I programmed it in. So that is inherent in the BDD system. It's not inherent in Erlang, although it's a simple capability of Erlang based on the way Erlang operates. So the actual code that does that, I can show you. It's actually pretty transparent code. It does an evaluation list somewhere in here. It's right here. So this is recursive attempts to run the steps. And what it tries to do is it applies the feature, the step, and the input. And so the features, this is actually a list of that list. So it automatically adds its feature name. That's why it's called feature. And then it adds in the downstream ones. And then here's a whole bunch of catches. One of the things that it'll do here, this will be sort of fun. If I went in and created a brand new scenario, so if I did this and then ran it, I don't have to compile it. I can just go in feature nodes. What it is going to do is it's going to say, hey, you just created a step. I don't know what it is. And it's saying, hey, add this missing when step. And it gives me the step file for it. It actually gives me the syntax that I would use to start. At that point, I'm going to have some decisions to make. Typically, if I'm building a new step, I don't know that it's generic. So I would add it here to my nodes list. So step, I don't know what I'm doing. Here we go. So I just created a new step and put it into the nodes function, and I said it's going to return false, meaning it didn't pass. Over here, since I changed Erlang, I need to compile the nodes file. I did. It's pretty straightforward. So now when I go into this feature, there's a bug. It should have failed because I said false. Because sorry, givens don't pass or not pass. Let me do this correctly. Then I should fail. Okay. Try this again. And so now it actually says when I'm in training, I should fail, and it identifies it as a failure. You might say, well, wait a minute, Rob, you just defined I should fail. I should fail is a BDD catch-all. The BDD catch-all has all sorts of things like when I do nothing, when I have nothing to do, when I fail. And this is the code to catch the missing steps is actually itself a missing step, or is actually a step. So these things at the end catch the badly formed steps or missing steps. So catch-all literally does that. It's not part of the code per se, it's a step file. And the same thing is true. There's a whole bunch of sleeps and pauses if you need that. We have, with Crowbar 2, I don't think we're going to need any sleeps. With the chef stuff, we did need sleeps to let the things propagate. IO format, by the way, is effectively a put statement. I have a better way to do puts now that I use than this. This one usually means something I don't want to go away. I'll use put if I'm planning for it to be a debug statement that's temporary. You'll see that if you look through the code. The code itself is pretty short. Erlang is really good at processing lists, and I've been cleaning things up and trying to add in comments as I go. So you should not, unless you're really trying to get into this, you shouldn't need to look at the BDD particularly much. BDD utils used to have a lot of stuff that's been getting shorter. So that those things should make sense. Erlang's sort of fun. It's functional, and so you get a lot of action happens in these case statements where you say type is a atom of number, and if it doesn't match, then it'll return values true and false and things like that. I've tried to minimize the use of regex. One of my issues with Cucumber had been that all the step functions were actually regexes, which I find very hard to parse personally. So all these step functions, the strings should be much easier to read. It's going to automatically parse based on quotes and pull data out on quotes. You can then you can do additional parsing in the bodies if you need to. However, that's not such a big deal. Do people understand how the step files work and how to add them? Okay. What I could then do is if this step went, and I do this all the time, if I get a step in my one file that's useful, the next logical place for me to do is say, well, you know what? I don't need it here. What I really want to do is I want it to be in the one for Crowbar. So I might have a Crowbar step, and I might move it to Crowbar and make it Crowbar. If there's one that's even more general, like a web page, getting a data off of a web page or doing a form put or something like that, that goes in WebRat. So there's this natural progression of most specific to more general and reused code as you can start with steps, get them working, and then flow them into more common use. Some things like node setup this started in Node, and it became so common that it was worth doing. So for example, the dashboard and Node both need Node setup. So it moved into the Crowbar utility. It's specific to Crowbar, so it won't make it all the way into WebRat. And hopefully that makes sense. What I've been doing here, this one's specifically interesting. So the step, I'll show you what this is. This is a step setup, and there's a step teardown. This is the global. These provide global setups and teardowns. So in this case, this is how we actually create. You'll notice over here when I run the test, before it does anything else, it says I created this for testing. That's a global setup, and down here there's a global teardown. And then there's a node-specific setup and teardown over here, and then over here are my setup and teardowns. Let me show you where those are, because if you're doing Ajax testing, they're very, very handy to have, and they're not very hard to set up. So let me show you in Node. So in the Node file, if I want a setup step, all I have to do is in the file that matches, the Erlang file that matches the feature name, I just have to create a step called step setup. If it's not there, It doesn't do a setup. It doesn't do a setup step, and it'll tell you that. So I got tired of putting strings into paths, so I created this little global routine. There's a way to do constants. I wasn't happy with it, so I ended up doing it like this. This lets me just have one place to go look for things, even across files. I'll show you how that works. So my path is this. My name is here. It's pretty obvious. I could also do this. So I'll fix that right here and right here. There you go. Just to make the code tighter. So the way Erlang works is here's the name of the method. Method names can be the same as long as there's a different pattern match. And then here's the routine. The lines are delimited by commas until you get to the end of a method. The end of a method is delimited with a semicolon if there is another method in the file that has the exact same input parameters, but a different pattern. So you'll find in steps, this is probably the most confusing thing you'll find. All right, maybe not the most. It's one of the confusing things that trip people up in Erlang, is that the semicolon indicates that this step method is the same as this step method except the pattern match. This one is the last one in the file, so it gets a period. This JSON file is the only one in the file, so it ends with a period. This G is the only one, so it ends with a period. If I was to create an override with a different pattern match, the one before it would end with a semicolon. Erlang grammar takes a little bit of getting used to because inside case statements, they use semicolons, and there's some rules for Erlang grammar. It's not hard to pick up, and it's easy to follow by example until you get the rhythm of it. And my job here is not to teach you Erlang. You can certainly inspect, and this is how I learned Cucumber. You can inspect the steps that exist for examples, and then that'll get you started until you reach a point where you're comfortable actually making more significant code modifications. My goal for this is that you should, yeah. Hey, Andy. That's an interesting question. I don't know. There should be. I haven't tried that, but there should be. It's a good suggestion. Yeah, it's a very good suggestion. I like it. Okay. So yeah, most steps that you're going to do are going to basically be rebuilds of other steps. So for example, and the reason why I want to stress on this one is that this pattern of creating a node where I create a JSON file. So let me show you how this works. In the node file, there is a way to construct JSON for that system. So what I can do is I can create a JSON output. Just like Ruby, the last method, the last command run is what the return result is for the method. And so to create a JSON output, these are the tuples that create the JSON. So name, description, order, and they get fit in name, description, order. This is a pretty straightforward thing. This produces JSON. Okay, this is an Erlang list. They are being called right here. So in this case, I'm calling JSON. This calls JSON. This is the name. It's coming from this item. I'm passing in a string, and then the order is 100. So this one line right here will generate a JSON string with those inputs. Does that make sense? And then setup, what I've done is I've created a BDD utility called setup create. This maybe should be in, this actually probably should be in Crowbar, not BDD utilities. So what setup create will do is it takes the configuration file, it takes the path, takes the the node atom, And just like if you're using Ruby, atoms are the same thing, have the same concept in Erlang. It's an immutable constant that you can use, pass around, and don't have to parse. So it's not a string, it's a fixed symbol that you can then use in the future. And they're very handy in Erlang. Then I'm going to get the actual name. So it's going to come out of here, and then this is the JSON. So in BDD util setup create, and I'm drilling down in here so you can see how this operates. These have been getting pretty well hardened. All right. One thing to note is all Erlang modules have their name up top, and then these are the methods that are exported. By default, everything's private. So I have some puts and debugging statements and some tracing down here. Setup create. And since I've spent some time in this and I was expecting people to look at it, I've been trying to go back and add more code. What it'll do is it'll do a delete. So it tries to delete its action and just do cleanups. And then it'll post to create this new JSON file. It'll take the return key from that JSON file. So this is standard. This is based on the way that our pretty much all of the REST queries should work. It outputs a friendly message, and then this is the critical thing. It adds to the configuration. Here's the configuration list. It stores that. So another thing to keep in mind for Erlang is that Erlang likes to pass around lists because it's functional. It has no global variables. And so what happens is setup create is going to return basically the current configuration file with a new thing added to it. What it's going to get is the atom, which in this case would be like node 1, and then the ID returned from the database. And so that's going to get passed in as we go, basically building things up. I could run those commands myself if I wanted, and I haven't recompiled, and that should be okay. So if I do a config bdd get config default, I have to end with a period in the command line, in the command prompt. This retrieved my configuration file. Okay, it did not yet log me in. If I want to actually be logged in, I would say, I'll just call it C this time. One thing you can't do in Erlang is you can't use the same variable twice. So I can't just say, okay, now I want to do a new config. I actually have to create a new variable. So config BDD utils is site up. Is site up is a shortcut to log in to the site. And I just pass in my configuration file. And it fails for some unknown reason because I'm calling it wrong. No, I'm calling it right. That's strange. Okay. I'm not going to take the time to try and troubleshoot it. I've been messing around with the auth stuff, so it's possible that oh, sorry. Debugging this is its own separate thing. So there we go. So if I'm going to do debugging, I actually need to run my internet client and my crypto client, because those are used by the system. So now my site, once I turn on my client, I can use that client. Now I've logged into the system, it's done a digest auth, it's actually provided the information. So this C is now the configuration that I want to do. If I want to then call this setup, if I actually want to create an object, so let's do this, this is fun. So over here in my nodes section, I don't have any nodes. If I come back over here and I run the setup step, I'm going to have a lot of stuff on screen, so bear with me so that you can see it. Good. Okay. So over here, if I want to run this setup step, which makes perfect sense for me to run, what I can do is I can do a nodes set step, And then I'm going to pass in my config file. I don't have any global data, so I can just pass an empty list. Could somebody mute? I've got a lot of background noise. I'm going to tell it to do a step setup. 0. The underscore means it doesn't care, so I can put in anything here. It's basically a variable placeholder. And what I did was I just ran this step outside of the context of the code. One of the really fun things about functional programming is every function, if you have the right inputs, you can run it. There's no external dependencies in functional programming. So what I've done is I literally just, except of course for the website we're testing, that's a huge external dependency. What I've done is I've actually just run this step setup. The point I'm trying to make here is that it is injected. Let's see, it should have returned somewhere in here the new node that I just added. Yep, here it is at the very top. So what happened is I just ran this setup step called node create, and it injected node 1. That's the atom I gave it, and the ID is 22. So over here now, you'll see we actually have created this item, and if I look, let me drill into it in its own tab. It is node 22. No surprise. Right, so this shouldn't be any surprise. I'm just trying to show you guys how this stuff all fits together. I'm literally calling the RESTful command to create an object, right? I could do the same thing if I do a teardown, although I made a mistake. Let's see something. So what I want to really do is I want to store C2. So I'm going to keep, I need that file. And now I'm not seeing where it put the new ID. And then I should be able to call teardown with my new configuration file. And sorry, I don't usually call teardowns manually. Step teardown. The C2 it's going to inherit all the, thank you. That's why I failed. Thank you, Andy. Entirely right. So here's the setup. So C3 now. And you can forget a variable if you make a mistake. I can just do FC2, capital C. Variables have to start with capitals. Atoms start with lowercase. So now I have node 23. And now if I do my teardown, boom, it tore it back down. It actually gives me the syntax, hey, I removed it. So it's possible to come in and sort of test things out and go back and forth with it. The reason I'm drilling on these specifically is they're very important if you want to do RESTful testing, right? Because you're going to want to be able to create, destroy, create some given objects so that you can populate your system and tear them down. BDD can fail in such a way that it leaves garbage in the system, that I've not tried to make the teardowns that resilient, which is why I do a destruction before I do a create on the setups, which I'd leave in anyway as a safety measure. But so you'll notice that this is live code, right? This isn't some massively maintained library. This is something that is unique to Crowbar, although I've tried to keep the functionality generic. Okay. I'm going to pause and let people ask questions because I'm running out of time and I want to make sure I take questions if we have any. Okay, I haven't totally blown people away with a whole bunch of Erlang syntax. That's good. Maybe I have. To actually create a new RESTful test, what you would do is there's a series of, I prefix them all with Ajax, and we might get to a point where it makes sense to have a BDD Ajax for these tests and split them out. The tests that I've been building are things like there should be a key, the key should have a value, the key should contain a certain number of items, it should contain at least a certain number of items, it should be a number, it should be an empty string. So these are very easy to reuse. If you're in the nodes feature, you'll see how these things operate, right? So when Ajax requests when Ajax requests this page, then there should be a sum. And so here's a really good example of the type of thing that you might want to simplify. So in nodes, what I could actually say is when Ajax requests the node, actually this one, I don't want to change this one yet. Here we go. So for example, if I'm doing a whole bunch of node things the goal here is to make the BDD language more English-like. So what would happen is I would say when Ajax requests the node page for, and then I would do it like this, sorry, like that, and then that would tell me to create a new step file. And I'm pretty lazy, so what I would do is this step file, would just call the WebRat, would probably just add the pieces to the, actually I can do that. Let me take out, I can leave that in too. So if I'm over here, and feature nodes, it's going to fail miserably because I'm missing this step. This is the I should fail step. And then this is the step for the thing I just added. So if I was going to do that over here, I would add a step. So when I'm on the node page for BDD, interrupt me for questions, please, because right now I'm showing you more of another example rather than answering specific questions. So this would be name. Right, so this is how I turn that syntax into something that's workable. Because I like to compile often and test things, I would do a node compile. Oops, nodes. It's going to warn me that I haven't used the variable. That's normal. And now it should come in and say that it should fail on that given. Yep. Oh, thank you for asking. That's an excellent question. So the when step means it's a setup step. Sorry. The given step is a setup step. So the idea is that you want to be able to test that you're in a certain state so that you can then take the next actions. So the given sort of preps the environment. It puts you in the page where you're going to then test the action. A really good example is that if you want to test a form submission, you're going to need to start with a given I'm on this page, right? And then you would say something like, when I put this data in the form, right? Or when I submit the form, then I should see this response. So from a sequencing perspective, we need to be able to set up the scenario. We need to take an action. That's what the when I do something is. And then the thens are all the tests to see that the result occurred. Okay. And that's entirely the same with the way Cucumber operates. It's the same syntax formula. So far, the givens have been pretty simple, but they're sufficient to do multi-step tests. That makes sense. So what I would do here is, just to keep things simple, I could do this. I could do a config. I can pass. So I'm just passing forward my results. Right. So these the underscores mean that the variable is optional, but you can still reference it by name. If I take out that underscore, then it's going to flag me with warnings that I haven't used a variable, which is really convenient. Right, so I can request and my syntax is crummy here, but what I can do is what I really want is this node path plus name. So in this case, what I've done is I've just reformatted. I've taken this request the node page for this. I don't need this extra page in here, so I can clean that up. And so I've just made it simpler. So now, and I'm going to run out of time. I'm out of time to show you how this gets completed. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Where's the one? Here's the one I was working on. No, where's the one I was working on? Oh. So what I just did was, now you can use this page out of the node object just because it's cleaner, and now you're not hard coding in paths over and over again. So when Ajax requests the node page for this, it's going to then call this routine, which still calls the same WebRat step. I just happen to pull the path now from the global variable path area instead of hard coding it into the page, which makes the whole darn page more resilient. And this type of change that for cleanup, I usually go back and start adding things under Rails dry principles. And with that, I have gone a whole hour. I hope this has been helpful. Please continue to ping me or ask questions, and we'll continue expanding this as we go. An hour's not enough time to cover everything.